I'm Melissa.
I'm Jam.
And I'm a chemist.
And I'm not.
And welcome to Chemistry for Your Life,
The podcast that takes your questions that may or may not have to do with something about chemistry and answers or tries to respond the best we can.
Jam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I've got my coffee for your life in my chemistry for your life mug.
That is so cute. I love it.
My
for your life?
Yeah.
Coffee for Your Life is Jam's coffee company grinding thing. So it's like perfect that he calls it that.
Yeah. It was technically the second For Your Life thing that ever existed.
I don't know if the listeners know that actually Chemistry for Your Life is just part of Jam's For Your Life empire, really. It's a whole empire.
It's an empire that's been just, you can kind of add For Your Life on the end of anything. That's kind of why I did it.
It's perfect.
I was like, what's a way to basically not have to worry about the naming of things? So the first thing I did was cards. I designed some greeting cards that I only use, or not greeting cards, some thank you cards. And so I just put cards for your life on the back. And then I think then it was coffee, and then podcast for your life, and then kombucha for your life, and then chemistry for your life.
That's a fun origin. I bet people don't know that. And also people probably don't know that my brother and I talked about making this podcast before his baby was born. It would have been a lot harder with him because he's not an audio engineer the way you are. And
he lives a little further away.
Which mattered at the beginning, but doesn't
right
now.
Yeah.
But he wanted to call it Let's Get Chemical and then have the theme song be Let's Get Chemical, like that song.
Yeah, which was a great idea. You told me that back when we were first talking about it, but it also felt a little bit like, oh, that was y'all's idea. It might be better for us to just do it different so that it doesn't just take what y'all were talking about.
Right. So shout out to my brother. He was the first one who thought this was a good idea. He doesn't like science as much as Jam, or maybe he, at the time, felt like not science as a whole, but chemistry wasn't as applicable as I was trying to make it out to be. And so it's almost going to be a convince him that chemistry is everywhere in your life. So, but now he is a reviewer on our show, and he's awesome and has great ideas, and we love him here at Chemistry for Your Life. So thanks,
yes,
Anthony.
We do.
Sorry we bailed on you. Okay, you got some questions for me?
I've got some questions for you. So the first question is, I think, a really interesting one from Caleb R. He asks, does unleaded gasoline need a chemistry explanation?
Caleb, that is a great question. And the answer is absolutely yes. All gasoline needs a chemistry explanation. My roommates and I were just having this conversation the other day when we talked about what type of gas you put in your boat compared to your car and what even is gasoline. So it's on the docket. It's on the list. We're going to get to it. But I didn't even think about tackling the unleaded part of it. So it's all going to be in there.
Dang, I'm very interested in that. I've also always wondered why the heck would they call it gasoline, knowing that we shorten it to call it gas, and it is a liquid. It's a liquid that we call gas. And I'm like, whose idea was that?
I never even thought about that. Those two things were in different categories in my brain. I didn't think about gas meaning solid liquid gas and gasoline being a liquid that we put in our vehicles.
Yeah. That's the thing that a non-chemist like me would just be annoyed by. Who picked these words and why did we do it like that? You knew people were going to shorten it.
Even when you were initially starting that explanation, I was thinking, what's wrong with gas? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay. So good job, Caleb. It's coming. Don't worry.
Nice. Good question. Okay, so the next one is from Mason K. And he asks, there are some sprays that will activate superglue quicker, or you can sprinkle baking soda on there. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I can. That is a fun one because it allowed me to use the fundamentals of chemistry and I didn't even have to look it up, which is exciting. So we know that superglue, as it cures, is basically a chemical reaction that a polymer is forming, and it's initiated by a catalyst. It starts off the reaction, and that catalyst are these negatively charged ions in water. Baking soda also has negatively charged ions And I'm assuming so do those sprays. So I think they just start the reaction faster and get more polymers growing at the same time, more molecule chains growing at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it cures faster rather than relying on the trace amounts of those that exist in the slight coverage of water that's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
That's my guess. I didn't look it up. That's just what I think from my brain.
Interesting. And it makes sense because everybody knows about the fundamentals of chemistry, that they're well known to be fun.
And then the next question I actually put in because they didn't have time to talk about it in the episode, but I really wanted to.
Okay. So this
is my question to myself.
This is from listener. Sorry, 1 second. I couldn't hear what you were saying. This is from listener Melissa C. And she asked, why doesn't Superglue harden in the tube?
Okay, it's the opposite of the negatively charged ions. Those are known as bases. Positively charged ions, a specific one, a proton, is acidic. So they coat the inside of the tube with an acid so that reaction can't start because the acid is neutralizing any of those negative charged ions that are coming at it. Amazing.
Interesting.
So my reference for that is in the references for the Superglue episode, but I couldn't find a way to fit it in. So I won't have that reference here because I don't remember which specific one it was, but it's in that other reference.
Okay. Nice.
Isn't that so smart and clever?
Yeah. Dude, that's awesome. Very interesting.
I was amazed. Also, since we're just throwing in things that I wanted to include in this Q&R, someone on Instagram named Gab Polar replied to our query for questions on Instagram and just told us that she loves the podcast, which I thought was really nice to take the time to say that. So thanks, Gab Polar. That was sweet. Wanted to give you a shout out, even though you didn't have a question. She said, I don't have a question, but
yeah,
I love the podcast so much. I thought that was really nice and kind. So
yes, that was very nice. And we are here whenever you do, if ever, have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this next question isn't a question. It's a tidbit of info from Dr. Moon, which she sounds like almost like a superhero or something. Like Dr. Strange.
Yeah, she does. Yeah.
That sounds way cool, Dr. Moon. So, okay, she said, when I listened to your podcast about smells, it reminded me of something I'd read in Napoleon's Buttons, 17 Molecules That Changed History by Penny Lacotil. So what is that? Is that?
I think it's just a book about 17 molecules that change history. I've heard of that before, and I really want to read it, but I haven't yet. This was going to jumpstart me to do it because it'll give me more things to chat about on the podcast.
Interesting.
Thanks, Dr. Moon.
And so she goes on to say, most of us are familiar with the spices of nutmeg and clove. I'm fairly certain that you would be able to tell the difference between both the taste and the smell of the two spices. The super cool thing is that the chemical structure of the compounds responsible for the taste and smell of the spices is remarkably similar. In fact, eugenol from cloves and isoeugenol from nutmeg are exactly the same except for the position of a single double bond. In other words, eugenol and isoeugenol are made up of the same elements in the same ratios. The only difference is where that one double bond is found. Holy.
Yes. So I was very excited about that. This comes from, we said, Dr. Moon. She's a PhD in genetics and microbiology, and she does homeschooling now. And she's really fun. We follow her on Instagram now, and she has some really good stuff that she shares. You can go check her out. But I really love this because it underlines some things that we've talked about before. And that is the idea that form and function go hand in hand. The way this molecule is shaped or the atoms that go into it impact how it functions in our bodies. So we had a similar thing when we talked about sugars, and I mentioned limonene, which is orange or lemon, and they are the exact same molecule but a mirror image. And one our receptors take as orangey, and one our receptors take as lemony.
Right.
Or when we had all those capsaicin was a vanilloid, which a lot of other things like ginger are also, and vanilla are vanilloids. So they have one base unit that's similar, but that functional group attachment changes out. So you can see how the way something is built and the way it functions go hand in hand, and small changes can make big impacts in chemistry. And we've talked about that a lot. So I didn't know about this example. So when she sent it to me, I was really excited to include that in our Q&R.
Yeah. Dang, that's awesome. That's crazy.
Super cool.
So this next question's a fun one. Last time, you guys might remember, we got a question from our friend Harry, who asked about our favorite movies. And we gave some of those. We actually also traded movies, which we'll talk about in a second. But he asked about our favorite books this time. So what are some of our favorite books, Melissa? Which actually, you know what's funny is we talked about this whenever you were on Podcast for Your Life. We did a little bit of book sharing and stuff.
That's true. Well, right now I'm reading Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And that's a really good book that's a scholarly book, but also sort of feels like a novel, which I'm partial to.
Yeah, I'm reading that too, actually.
Really?
Did we talk about that? Yeah.
Did you send me a video clip of you reading that out loud to your son once?
That was just on our shared album, I think, that M took. But yes, that's what I was reading. I'm about a third of the way through it.
I think I'm actually in a similar place. So it's a really good book, and I really like her introduction. Talks about the language that we choose to use and how that impacts what people perceive you as. You know, I could say I'm a chemist, and some people might think that means one thing, but it could mean something really different. I don't work in a lab, but that's not the picture you paint with the word chemist.
Right.
You know,
right.
So I don't work in a lab anymore, but so I really, really like her approach to that book. And I also just finished up Anna Karenina, which took me 2-ish years to listen to. And something I really liked about it was how she is the one who reads it, but the way he writes about the book, I mean, it can be really dull. It's an old Russian classic. But he does a really good job of taking you out of your perspective and putting you in another perspective. And I was inspired to read it by an episode of the podcast Rough Translation. And they put out an episode called Anna in Somalia. And it really talks about how the book Anna Karenina impacted this Somalian prisoner, and how it really changed his life. So then I started to read it, and it is incredible to me how Tolstoy is able to do that and write about human nature in a way that you think this is still happening. People are still acting like this right now, or I still struggle with my subjective opinion and need to be able to take my mind out of it and look at the objectivity. And Anna Karenina is just really good at that. It's just really good at showing all the perspectives and how you could be interpreting something one way and someone else is having a completely different experience.
Yeah. Interesting. Good answers.
But also it's really boring. Don't go into it thinking it's going to be the most fun and interesting book. It's both. It's sometimes fascinating and so fun to listen to, and sometimes I did not care at all. What about you? Okay, you're reading Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, and what are some of your other favorites? Okay,
so you and I share a love of Lord of the Rings. That's one of my favorite
100%, yeah.
Series of books. I love... I've done a lot of sci-fi, like kind of classic sci-fi or just highly regarded sci-fi books. Like 2001: A Space Odyssey is so good. I love The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by Oliver Sacks, Dr. Oliver Sacks. That's a fascinating book. It's real stories of his experiences with patients that he's changed the information about them, but tells them in a really qualitative way. Super interesting. He's a neurologist, right?
And he loves chemistry.
Yeah, he's super cool.
He's been on Radiolab.
Oh, yeah, a ton. And he is no longer with us. R.I.P.
Yeah.
Dr. Sachs. So, but this last one I want to say is Dune, the book, the legendary book by Frank Herbert.
Dune.
Nice.
I never come up with good things like that. That was exciting.
Nice. That was good. That was good. So this one is especially exciting because it's finally getting what appears to be what is a very promising film adaptation finally.
Woohoo!
So,
That's
Dune is
exciting.
awesome. Very, very good book. Great time to read it. But between now and December, you've got till December 18th to read it so that you're ready to watch the movie. And it is very good. There's a lot of science in Dune, a lot of ecology, a lot of kind of power struggles, a lot of very relatable class and race and ethnic struggles that are happening in the book that are not that dissimilar from things that happen here in real life on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got beasts, it's got prophecies, it's got all kinds of stuff.
It's got it all. It's got everything.
Yep.
Okay, maybe I'll give it a try.
I've been trying to root hard for people to read Dune now. So you guys, this is not the last you'll hear of Dune and me talking about it, even if someone doesn't ask.
Yay. Okay, well, that's exciting.
I'm rereading it now, so I'll probably be talking about it as I go.
Okay, well, we'll be looking forward to those updates. Maybe I'll think about reading it. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But I do want to see what happened with you and watching Pride and Prejudice, because I didn't get an update from that, but you updated me. But I updated you on my watching of The Godfather. So Let's hear it.
Okay, well, I watched Pride and Prejudice.
Did you watch it with friends or by yourself?
I watched it with two of my roommates, or my two roommates, I should say, not including my wife. And we watched it.
Did you like the filming? Did you like the nature scenes and that crazy long party scene where the camera never breaks?
Yes, I liked that. There's also a little bit of a shorter one at the beginning when she's walking, where they do a kind of long shot, where you're kind of just seeing her house and her life a little bit. But yes, I liked it. It was very pretty. The shooting and everything was good acting. We changed up our recording days, and so I ended up going from having like 5 days left to watch it to having 1 day. So I had to watch it last night, and I was tired, but it was good. It was better than I expected because I knew it was like a romantic story. I just was not expecting to enjoy it at all, but I liked Keira Knightley's character more than I expected I would. In a lot of romantic movies and stories, they just have everybody be pretty one-dimensional. It's like,
right.
And there was a little bit of that, I would say. Like, some of the other characters you don't get as much about. It's like all you know is that they want to get married. And that's like a little bit like, okay, like that's kind of archaic. It's not their fault that was what the times were like. But it's like you don't get to know some more about people other than just that everyone wants to get married.
Yeah.
And these people are not as rich as these people. But her character is cool. You get to learn more about her, and the very obvious fact that you get to have to relearn this one character that you think that you and she thinks that they know that you don't, and he's a lot better of a person than you think. And
spoiler alert.
No, sorry. This
you had several years to watch it, so
yeah. And I am on the like very, very tail end of that. Like surely, I'm one of the very few people who's not seen this movie.
Well, I did suspect you would feel that way. I suspected you would think it would be really stupid, but then you would be a little bit pleasantly surprised.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like the scene where she's on the swing in the barnyard, kind of, and it spins around and time passes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there's little things like that. Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing, too, that it being a book, that they really needed to have some clever ways to make time pass. Because any book like that, it's a classic that has to be put into a movie, there's things you're going to have to leave out and a bridge or whatever. And so I think that was a good way of doing it, just to make it clear that time was passing. Because otherwise it's like years passed since they first met, and that's what makes this so significant. Like otherwise it would just seem like, oh yeah, it was like a couple months ago, you know?
Right. And I think it is one of the best capturings I've seen of that story, which is really complex. All the characters in the book Pride and Prejudice are very complex, and you get to see more of them.
Mm-hmm.
And Jane Austen has a similar thing as Tolstoy, where she captures human nature and can kind of comment on the way people are even now by reflecting on the way people were then, you know? And my mom and I used to talk about that. And so I think that's a similar thing that I like about both of those authors, that
Yeah.
It was pretty good. So, but also that's just a pretty movie. It's just pretty.
Yeah.
So,
And what was pretty cool, like obviously fan favorite, huge fan of the character Mr. Collins. Like that was he's cool. Love
when
him.
he says boiled potatoes, it gets me every time. Excellent boiled potatoes.
His haircut, his everything is so cringy.
Oh wait, Mr. Collins is the cousin, right?
Yeah, he's a cousin.
Okay, good.
I was kidding because he's like very horrible and you don't like
Awkward,
him at all. And everything about him is just a little bit like, ugh.
I mean, I don't think he's a terrible person. He's just kind of a weird guy, you know? Like,
Yeah.
I don't think he has bad intentions. He just is not socially graced.
Yeah, and not aware of himself at all.
Yeah. Okay, well, I watched The Godfather, and I texted Jam after a really brutal scene where a pregnant woman was treated terribly and said, "What are we doing here? People just keep dying. Why am I watching this?" And he replied with some good thoughts that convinced me that I think were I to watch it again, I would be a little bit more happy about it because it does tell a good story and it has a point. You know, it's just slowly devolving of this character, but I was watching it thinking he was a good guy. And I was heartbroken and horrified as I watched what happened. And there's just some really hateful, cruel things that took place. People being hurt that didn't really deserve it in some cases. It was just really, it was hard to watch in some ways, but also I think that probably made it good.
Yeah.
So
it's a tough movie. It's definitely not like, I think sometimes people are like, oh, dude, I love The Godfather. Like, oh man, so cool. And like, that's just the wrong way to really get somebody like pumped for that movie.
I think that's what I was expecting.
Yeah, it's an epic. It's almost like Shakespearean, like a modern. That's one of the things I told you whenever we were texting about it. But it's like a modern, somewhat modern. I mean, that's like 1940s or 50s or whatever, like version of what would be kind of like a Shakespearean story. Lots of characters,
right?
They're all flawed, and there's not really one that you can be like, okay, he's our guy. It's more like,
and it does kind of remind me too of that Tolstoy story. They're reflecting on human character. We're slowly looking at these experiences and trying to take it all in, you know, and it's not just going to end happy. That's not how real life works. So that's not how this is going to work, you know. Jane Austen has happy endings. So
yeah.
But also, I feel that I have so many more cultural references. I knew they were from The Godfather from watching Gilmore Girls.
Oh, yeah.
But now I know what they mean.
Yep. Now you can like carry the card, even if you didn't like love it or you don't want to watch it again, which is totally fine. Now you've got the references and you can reference them. You're not just like, oh, I recognize that from somewhere else or whatever.
I think I would watch it again. And I think my second viewing experience would be enhanced by knowing what was coming. Because I think I went into it thinking it was going to be more like a cool gangster type film, like Public Enemy #1 maybe, but instead it was a story of something much deeper and more heartrending. So I was taken aback to some degree, but I think if I watched it again, I would know what I was expecting and be able to appreciate it more. Sometimes I spoil myself on movies so that I can have that, because if I don't know what to expect, that's going to really impact me. So I think if I watched it a second time, I would like it more, actually. I might. If the opportunity arises, I'll say yes. And maybe I'll watch The Godfather Part 2.
Yeah, I think you'd be pretty prepared for Part 2, which is very good also.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Cool. Well, this is a fun one.
Yes, that's chemistry movie talk here on 98.5, the Flask.
The longest bonus episode of our lives.
Yeah. And all you guys had already seen all those movies. It's funny too, because those are two movies that probably like most people have seen both of. A lot of people have. And here we are being like, oh, Pride and Prejudice. Wow. Like, that was interesting. And like The Godfather, I know it's been out for 40 years, but it's just we're just so behind.
It was a good trade. Everyone else who hasn't seen those movies or who hasn't loved them, please write in and tell us your thoughts, because I thought this was really fun. And Q&Rs are our time to connect with you guys in a more public setting, and I really like that. So, we want to hear from y'all.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, thanks, Jam, for watching Pride and Prejudice, which is against, some of your nature, and for finding the beauty in it. And thanks to all you listeners for putting up with us chatting about movies for 10 minutes.
And thanks for watching Godfather. And thanks, Harry, again, for those fun questions. That was awesome.
Yeah, that is fun. And anyone who wants to hear any other non-chemistry stuff from me and Jim, we love it. And we think it's really fun. We're friends, so we like chatting. This episode of Chemistry for Your Life was created by Melissa Collini and Jam Robinson. We'd like to give a special thanks to E. Robinson, who reviewed this episode.